Short video from the ONS describing UK rural and urban classifications. For a transcript, email info@ons.gov.uk. In recent years, a comprehensive set of classifications have been created, allowing users to measure the differences between urban and rural areas consistently and objectively. These classifications use consistent sets of rules to assign a label to every area within a country. Classifications use different inputs. Population size, population density, and distance are common variables, but not the look and feel of an area. They give different area types, between 2, urban and rural, and 8, which breaks urban and rural areas up into more detail. A classification is effectively a spreadsheet of labels that can be matched to any other geographic dataset through geography codes. The classifications for England and Wales differ slightly to those in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and although we cannot directly compare urban and rural populations from these different classifications, it's useful to look at the percentage of people who live in rural areas in each country. Based on mid-2009 small area population estimates, the rural population made up around a fifth of the populations of England and Scotland, and over a third of the populations of Wales and Northern Ireland. However, if we look at the land classified as rural in each country, it is much higher, with 94% of the land rural in Scotland and Northern Ireland. We will now look at the classifications for each country, starting in England. The rural-urban definition classifies areas ranging from output areas to wards, but is shown here for middle-layer super-output areas, which are areas across the country defined such that there is a similar-sized population across each, at around 7,500 residents. There are 6 different types of areas available, with 2 types of urban and 4 types of rural, but this map just shows those areas that are rural or urban. If we compare the map to one that defines rural and urban areas at a higher geographical area, in this case local authority, we see there are more urban areas, shown on the map based on the smaller geographies on the left-hand side. This is because a local authority, which is say 70% rural and 30% urban, based on land area, may be classified as rural. But if we split the local authority up into smaller areas, we can then identify pockets of urban areas. There are several points worth noting about England's classifications. The urban-rural definition is set to be updated using 2011 census data. It picks out 1.4% of the population living in remoter, sparse areas, most of which are rural. It gives uneven-sized populations. 4/5 of people live in urban, less sparse areas. The local authority classification gives more evenly sized groups and breaks down urban areas into 3 different types. A few local authority boundaries changed in 2009. Datasets covering old and new boundaries are available. The older boundaries are used here as they give more detail. The rural-urban definition mentioned for England was also designed for use in Wales, again picking out urban and rural small areas but also separate settlement types and the most remote, sparse areas. The local authority classification for Wales gives 1 type of rural area and 3 types of urban area, in 2 separate blocks. It is interesting to see how the small area definition gives a much more thinly spread group of urban areas in the south, and a group in the north that is spread more evenly along the coast. Again, this difference is explained by allowing us to identify pockets of both urban and rural areas within local authorities that you cannot do when classifying a whole local authority to urban or rural. The definition gives less unevenly sized population in Wales and England, but most people still live in urban, less sparse areas. There are alternative ways of classifying areas that are town and fringe. The local authority classification gives different urban area types, which is useful, but these are defined in part using local knowledge. The Scottish Government's urban-rural classification gives a detailed set of area types, grouped here simply as urban and rural areas. It picks out some urban small towns in very remote areas such as Stornoway in the Outer Hebrides. The Randall definition of local authorities simply picks out those with a population density of more than 1 person per hectare. Outside the central belt of urban areas, only Aberdeen is classified as urban. Inverness's authority Highland is not. Again, small area data gives a much more detailed picture. The Scottish classifications are 2 very different products. The small area classification covers different urban area types and remote areas. The Randall local authority definition is an older, pragmatic one and is used less frequently. Scotland has a very distinct band of urban areas in both classifications. The small area classification is updated every 2 years, more frequently than any other classification. Finally, the classification has the lowest urban threshold of any. A settlement of 3,000 people is considered urban, compared to 4,500 for Northern Ireland, or 10,000 for England and Wales. Different thresholds mean we cannot combine classifications easily. The Northern Ireland Urban-Rural Classification of Settlements is a classification based on very detailed settlement boundaries, giving 5 types of urban area. Some urban areas appear very isolated. Omagh, for example, has no other urban area nearby. The first 2 urban area types are simply Belfast and Derry, as they have populations so much larger than those of other areas. There is no rural-urban classification for local authority areas. However, this classification of areas into less accessible and more accessible groups can be used to give proxies for rural and urban areas, based on the pre-May 2011 boundaries. As with Scotland, these are 2 very different products. The small area classification gives a variety of area types. The local authority classification is only a rough approximation of urban and rural areas. The small area classification is available for a variety of geographies from precise settlement boundaries to wards. The Northern Ireland population is very polarised. A third live in the most urban area type, Belfast, and over a quarter, 28%, in the most rural, as at 2009. Links to most of these classifications can be found on the ONS's webpage for rural and urban classifications, at the link on the page now. Before that, here's some guidance on using a classification to analyse a geographic dataset. Firstly, download a rural-urban classification. These are usually Excel or CSV files. Check that the data you want to work with have the same geography codes as those in the classification, although local authorities can be matched on names. Match the 2 files together, which can be done in Excel using VLOOKUP. Aggregate the data for each area type, which can be done in Excel using pivot tables. If the data are rates, for example percentage of people claiming benefits, you can just take an average for, say, all rural areas. However, as area sizes differ, it's more accurate to add up numbers of rural benefit claimants and numbers of rural working age people, and only then calculate a claimant rate. This may require another dataset. Finally, compare rural-urban figures with those for each rural or urban area type, if available. For more information, email better.info@statistics.gov.uk. More analysis can be found in the Regional Trends article with the link in the description of this podcast. There is also another podcast explaining the rural and urban statistics. Also, a Google map using the definition for areas across the UK is available at the link in the description of this podcast. Other products that can be used alongside rural and urban classifications can be found from the Neighbourhood Statistics website for each country.